The primary problem has been at the worldview level. The assumptions that make abortion plausible to millions of our fellow citizens are deeply entrenched in the culture, and they're not going to go away without a long, staged battle. And Christians need to be equipped to engage that battle, which is why Summit is so useful.
Welcome to the Dr. Jeff Show podcast. On this show, I interview major thought leaders from various fields of influence, showing how our worldview changes everything. You can find the show everywhere podcasts are found, including Liftable, Edify, Apple, Spotify, you name it. My guest today is my good friend, Scott Klusendorf, author of the highly influential book, The Case for Life, Equipping Christians to Engage the Culture. Guess what? There's a new version out. You think I want you to have it? You better believe it. Scott has traveled around the country speaking at various universities and on national talk shows defending the pro-life cause. He's a graduate of UCLA with honors and holds a master's degree in Christian apologetics from Biola University. He is an outstanding speaker here at Summit Ministries, and for a decade and a half, I put him in front of every single group that I have the opportunity to put together. So please welcome Scott Klusendorf to the show. Scott Klusendorf, welcome back to the Dr. Jeff Show podcast.
Dr. Jeff, my friend, it is always a joy to be with you.
Well, we have been friends for a long time. I say that with a lot of the shows, and actually I had somebody who's a potential guest said, you seem to have friendships with all of the people that you interview. And so we should have a couple calls so we can become friends before the show begins. Scott, you have taught on pro-life at Summit Ministries, I think going all the way back to on a regular basis for almost 15 years now.
That's about right. Yeah. Since you joined Summit as the president and head of the teaching content and material, I've been on board, and it's been a joy.
It's so important that we usually begin every 2-week session with your content on pro-life. And I'd love to just hear why you think it's so important. I mean, if you got 2 weeks at Summit Ministries, you got 56 hours of content you're going to be going through. You're going to be meeting these famous Christian apologists and all these different things. Why start with life? Why is that so important?
Well, there's two reasons. The first is technical and the other is more philosophical. The philosophical reason is this: the question, what is man, is dominating culture right now. The question of, is human nature real and knowable, or are we free to construct it any way we want? And that question is at the forefront of thinking in the debates we're seeing over abortion, transhumanism, bioethics in general. And students need to know how to engage those questions in a persuasive way. So it's important they get that. But there's a second reason. The way I approach this, I don't want to just give them answers. I want to teach them how to think. So many of the things we teach in learning to recognize bad arguments apply to everybody's topic that's speaking at Summit, not just mine. For example, learning to recognize when someone is making an assertion rather than an argument, recognizing when they're attacking the person rather than dealing with the argument, learning when they're assuming when they should be arguing. These are things that help you in your approach to Christian apologetics across the board. So if I can give those students those tools of recognition right out of the gate, they're going to be a step ahead as the other speakers come in.
That's exactly right. If you learn to think clearly about life, that will help you think more clearly about everything else.
That's right. In fact, the three most important words I give students on day one are syllogism, syllogism, syllogism. They need to learn how arguments function, that you can't dismiss a well-crafted argument from a Christian theist, whether he's a pro-lifer or arguing from cosmology. You cannot say to the Christian, hey, I don't like your argument because I think you're just a mean person. That's not going to refute the syllogism. It's not going to work to just invent your own story that you think is a counter narrative. You've got to demonstrate why the argument is either unsound, invalid, or unclear. And outside of that, the Christian's argument stands.
Let's review that syllogism briefly, and I'm going to put it in my words here and see if I get this about right. See how good of a student I've been at Summit Ministries. So premise A is, it is always wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Premise B, abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Therefore, C, abortion is always morally wrong.
You nailed it. It's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. Abortion does that, therefore it's wrong. The beauty of this, Dr. Jeff, is it allows us to bring clarity to our engagements with people. I know everybody watching us right now that's married has had times where they've been in a discussion with their spouse and they maybe weren't getting the best of that discussion. And so the subject has a habit of getting changed and all kinds of other stuff comes in. And all of you watching right now, don't get prideful on us. We all know you do it just like we do. So it's very important we keep the main thing the main thing. And the main thing in the abortion debate is the argument that's being advanced, not all this subtle stuff that gets thrown into the mix when people don't like what we're arguing.
Well, the abortion issue has in many ways evolved, and even within the last year or so. The overturn of Roe v. Wade, which in my sense of it needed to be overturned because it was bad law. Yes. It was a poorly reasoned Supreme Court decision. Yes. So it needed to be overturned, but that has set in motion all kinds of things across the states, from limiting abortion to a certain number of weeks of gestation, others saying abortion is legal up to the very moment of birth, others saying, let's put this to a vote of the people, all different kinds of things. So you got 50 different approaches that people are experimenting with right now because there are 50 different states. What would you say and we're going to talk in a minute about your amazing book, Case for Life, and a new edition that is coming out. To me, this is the owner's manual for the pro-life person. And I want to dig into it. But I'd just love to get your sense of the lay of the land. How has the pro-life issue changed in recent years, and what do we need to be aware of if we haven't thought that much about defending it recently?
Well, you're precisely correct, Dr. Jeff. Overturning Roe v. Wade was an intrinsic good in and of itself. It was horrible law, and it prevented pro-lifers from having a voice at the table. So it needed to be overturned. However, since then, let's be realist here, we are 0 for 8 every time the abortion issue has been put to the public for a vote. We're losing in red states like Kentucky, Kansas, Montana, and we stand a real chance of losing a huge vote in this upcoming fall election in Ohio. And there's a reason for this, and it gets to the heart of what Summit does. I think the lesson pro-lifers need to learn is this. Our primary problem over the years has not been activist judges and a hostile press. The primary problem has been at the worldview level. The assumptions that make abortion plausible to millions of our fellow citizens are deeply entrenched in the culture, and they're not going to go away without a long, staged battle. And Christians need to be equipped to engage that battle, which is why Summit is so useful. It gives students the tools of thought to do precisely that. And my fear is that if pro-lifers don't switch from looking at, wow, why don't people like us, and start looking at the fact they don't agree with us at the foundational worldview level, we're going to face a long string of defeats moving forward.
That's very discouraging, Scott, especially when you think about how many of these states are, like you said, they're red states. And I think what you mean by that is people have a basic conservative traditional values impulse from which they operate. And
it is discouraging, but the way to fix it is to start with a sober, honest assessment of where we are. And I'll tell you something that is discouraging, but I think it's fixable. And I'm grateful that at Summit, we're working to fix that. I run a survey of students every session I speak, and I ask the students, out of roughly 188 students present at each session, how many of you before coming to Summit have had a pro-life apologetics presentation at your church youth group aimed at equipping you to discuss abortion with non-churched, non-believing friends? And out of 188, on a good session, we might get 12 hands that go up. And we wonder why we're having trouble reforming the culture. we don't have our own gatekeepers engaged, making sure students get trained the way they're getting trained at Summit on the abortion issue. The
Well,
good news of that is, though, we can fix that. That's a fixable problem if we just engage.
so one of the ways we're going to do that is we want to figure out how to get this book that you're bringing out, the second edition. So we're talking in the summer of 2023. I know people keep watching these shows for a long time, and I'm grateful. If you're not hearing this for a long, long time, that's completely fine. In November of 2023, the second edition of this book, Case for Life, comes out. And that has got to be on the desk of pastors, youth pastors, Christian teachers, whether they're in a public school, Christian school. Families need to have this as their reference tool. And I've got to tell you, so I read a lot of books ahead of the publication. And I'm very grateful for that because I kind of get a sense of what's coming down the road. I was very honored that you let me take a look over the manuscript and offer some comments on it. And I have to say, you must have this book. This is one you've got to get on your shelf. So if you're listening to this and it's August 2023, you can pre-order it. Just do that. Sometimes I hate to pre-order books because I'm like, well, I have to pay for it now, but it's not going to show up for 3 months. Pre-order it, and I'll tell you why. Because when you pre-order a book, the algorithms at places like Amazon.com, and I'm not telling you you have to order it there. I'm just using that as an illustration. The algorithms say, oh, wow, there's genuine interest in a book like this. We could probably make more money if we put this in front of more people. Then more people get to see it, and the book gains momentum so that when it comes out, it's already securing its impact.
Yeah. And I agree with that, Dr. Jeff. I really hope people will get this. And if they're worried about, hey, am I just going to get a new book cover on material that's already out there? I promise you that is not going to happen. There is roughly 44% increase in new material, new content. There's 8 new chapters, 10 rewritten ones. And I think there's some things in there that are going to help us moving forward. In fact, I wrote the book with an idea of what does pro-life advocacy look like in a post-Roe v. Wade world that we're in right now. For example, some of the new chapters include sections on what are the underlying worldviews that are driving the abortion debate. How does wokeness impact the abortion debate? How does naturalism impact the abortion debate? How does postmodernism impact the abortion debate? There's a whole section on who are the major thinkers in this. Who are the people driving the academic ideas that trickle down to the populace and eventually become commonplace? People like Peter Singer, Michael Tooley, David Boonin, and Kate Greasley, who's kind of the newcomer on the block. And I think I may be the very first pro-life author to engage her arguments. And she's a force to be reckoned with because she's very winsome, very engaging, and I have a feeling that she's going to raise quite a following. And that's going to be a problem for our side if we're not prepared to engage her ideas. So I do engage her. There's a whole section that I'm very excited about on what does a pro-life church look like? What are the 4 marks of a pro-life church? Namely, a pro-life church is one that teaches a biblical view of human value. What does that look like in the local church? It also teaches, counsels, and advises that abortion is a sin. Well, how do we do that, especially when we've got so many people in our churches that have post-abortion experience? And that leads to the third benchmark. How do we present gospel healing to wounded men and women who've participated in abortion so that the sin of abortion does not cripple them from having full fellowship with Christ? And then finally, how do we equip and engage our own people on this issue in a public square that appears to be quite hostile to what they will be standing for? There's whole sections on that, including a section on how to be a speaker on this issue. And this is something you and I have both done. We've trained people to speak. And a lot of times people say, I don't want to speak. I'm afraid to speak. And here's my question. Are any of the fears we have about speaking publicly on this issue worth the price of children's lives that might have been saved had we been courageous enough to convey what we believe? And I think the answer to that question is that none of our fears measure up to that standard. So there's a lot in this new book that will equip readers to make that case for life in a post-Roe world.
One thing I love about the book is woven throughout, you have examples of conversations. Here's how this conversation might typically go, which you have written out based on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these kinds of conversations, and helping people think through what, what if your friend says this? What if your friend says this? Let's kind of talk that through a little bit, Scott, because I think there are a lot of people I know who watch this show. Well, mostly people just listen to it. So they're going for a walk. They've got the dog on the leash. They're going around the block. They're saying hi to their neighbors, or they're walking down the beach, or, they're riding in the car to and from work. And all of these people are in a position where they might actually almost at any given moment have to talk about the life issue. Around the water cooler, you're in Ohio. I guarantee you over the next 14 months, it's going to be a major topic of conversation. And if you are at work in the state of Ohio, you will be having this conversation.
Yep.
Right. So guide us through it a little bit, Scott. Let's, if you will, like, I can throw out a scenario, but let's just imagine it's around the water cooler, because I don't know if people even have water coolers anymore. It's just sort of a way of speaking that I think about. So you're at work, you got your coworkers there, you grab a cup of coffee, you're chatting for a few minutes before you get back to your computer, and they say, hey, I just can't believe we have to deal with this in this state. I mean, it's so obvious that in a free country, people ought to be able to have an abortion.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is a classic case where asking a good question can disarm the hotheads in the group and keep you collected so that you give clear responses. So if somebody says, hey, listen, the freedom to choose is a basic right, why wouldn't we support abortion? Very gently, I'm going to say, freedom to choose what? I want them to clarify what the choice is they're offering. And the choice they're offering, as we saw in our syllogism, is the choice to intentionally kill an innocent human being. I want to make sure that choice is spelled out and not just left in the abstract. And then I'm going to follow up with, where does this right to choose come from? If they respond, well, it comes from the government, I can very gently and yet directly say the same government that grants a right to an abortion can take it away. Well, it's a natural right that comes from our humanity, that's pre-political. Okay, I believe in natural rights, but if that's the case, then the unborn has a right to life that precedes any government-granted right to end their lives. So it becomes a way to clarify what's at stake. And what happens a lot, Dr. Jeff, is a lot of people make arguments for choice, privacy, trusting women, and all the other things they string out as reasons for supporting abortion. And every one of those objections assumes the unborn aren't human. They would never argue that way if we were talking about having the choice to kill toddlers. I mean, imagine someone saying, hey, I personally oppose, child abuse, but what you do with your kid in the privacy of the bedroom is none of my business. Or I personally oppose spousal mistreatment, but I'm not going to tell you you can't beat your wife. I mean, anybody who said those things would be laughed out of the room right now. At least for now, they would be. But notice they always argue that way with the unborn, but never these other groups. And the reason is they're assuming the unborn are not human. And we want to make sure that assumption gets challenged.
Yeah, that should be a chyron right across the screen right now. That all of these pro-abortion arguments begin with the assumption that the unborn person is not a human being.
That's right.
And they are, in essence, assuming the very thing that they ought to be proving.
That's correct. We call that begging the question in philosophical terms, where you assume what you're trying to prove. It's like me saying the LA Dodgers are the best team in baseball because no team is as good. Well, I'm just assuming the very thing I'm trying to prove there. I haven't advanced any reasons or arguments for my conclusion.
Yes. So this is really helpful. Now, I think there's kind of a political edge even when we're not in a political season, where somebody who advances the points that you're making here would be viewed with suspicion. Like, in other words, you are an unreasonable person if you are advocating for any limits on abortion. It's a clear example of what you're talking about. The assumption is only people who are bad people would try to argue against a woman's right to choose abortion. Because I want to dig into this for a minute. You got to challenge that. That's got to be part of the conversation. Otherwise, people go away saying, well, that guy is, what a narrow-minded bigot he is.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure we should have him working here.
Yeah. We need to challenge it two ways. We need to challenge it by defying expectations. And that happens when we show that we're reasonable, we're listening, we're engaged, we're not flamethrowers like other people are. We're actually calm and collected, and we're gracious to our critics. But we challenge it another way by showing that even if we are the worst people on the planet, that doesn't defeat our argument. Arguments, Dr. Jeff, stand or fall, as you know, apart from the people making them. Arguments stand on their merits, not me, not you, not anybody else. People say to me, you're a man, you can't speak on this issue. Well, the snarky part of me wants to say, how do you know I'm a man? In today's world of questionable pronouns, how dare you presume mine? But I don't do that, obviously. But what I do point out is that pro-life women use the same arguments as pro-life men. By the way, if no man can speak on abortion, Roe v. Wade should have been overturned 50 years ago because it was decided by 9 men. So this idea that arguments are somehow permanently related to the person making them is a false notion we need to challenge as pro-life Christians. No, our arguments stand or fall apart from us. That's not a license to be a jerk, but it does mean the real issue here is what is the argument, not what is the person.
Should you actually say, listen, I know that this is a politically tinged issue. I know that people have very, very strong feelings about it. What I'm trying to do is ask some questions that get beyond that.
Yeah, that's a good way to go. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll call time out. I'll say, hey, listen, do you mind if I make a quick observation? And I'm not trying to be a jerk here. I just want to observe something for clarity. I laid out a syllogism that it's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings, that abortion does that, therefore it's wrong. And I noticed that you really didn't engage my argument. You just called me names. And I'm an open-minded person. I want to pursue truth. I don't want to be on the wrong side of reality. I want to line up with it. Truth matters to me. So if my argument is bad, you can do me a very big service by showing me where it goes bad, but it doesn't help me get closer to the truth if you just attack me personally.
Yeah, that's so well put. We have some of these shows where I actually even say, okay, wind that back, re-listen to that. What just happened in the last 90 seconds? Because that's so articulate and so helpful. And it can sort of pull away the tension out of the conversation and get right back to what the heart of the issue is. Even if the person doesn't change his or her mind, you have planted a seed.
Just a quick story here, Dr. Jeff, that I mentioned in the book that's coming out in November. I was at UC Berkeley doing a debate with Malcolm Potts, who had been the international medical director for Planned Parenthood, and he teaches a population control course there. And for a while, I was going in every semester and debating him in front of 600 of his own students. And at the end of one of those debates, one of his students came up to me and said, I'm really bothered by what you said. It seemed to me you talked right past each other, and you didn't really address the issues that matter most to people like me. And I looked at this girl and I said to her very gently, I need to hear what you have to say. There's a line of people wanting to talk to me right now. Would you be willing to stay put? Because I can't get better if I don't listen to people who point out how I could get better, and you matter enough to me to where I want to hear what you have to say. Her jaw dropped to the floor. She didn't expect that. I totally defied her expectations in that moment. And she stayed after. And what I didn't know is she was the vice president of the atheist club on campus. And she brought her friends to the meeting with me after that debate, who had also been in the debate. And we sat around and talked for almost 75 minutes. We left as friends. Now, some might say that's measuring progress in inches rather than miles. But you know what? Sometimes that's what Christian discipleship looks like. We buy this false notion that if we don't beat the person into submission on the spot, we haven't done our job. In reality, persuasion is often done in inches, not miles.
Yeah. We're talking to Scott Klusendorf, who's my favorite pro-life trainer. Well, I should say you and all the people you've trained are all my pro-life trainers, all my favorites. And the book is called Case for Life. It's a second edition. It's come out. A lot of people, that was a big selling book, The Case for Life, when it came out. This one is 44% more content dealing with the specific new things that have come up, especially in a post-Roe world. So It's super, super timely. And I hope that you will pre-order the book, or if by the time you see or hear the show that it's already in print, then get that. And make sure you get 2 copies, get 3 copies. Make sure the pastor has one, the youth pastor has one, and then you've got one. And then talk with them. Can we get together for coffee and talk about some of the points that are in this book? You mentioned Christian discipleship as being central here. What we're actually doing is discipling ourselves and other people to be unafraid in communicating the truth, and to do it in a spirit of grace. At Summit Ministries, we talk about truth and relationship. Our colleague at Summit Ministries, Jason Jimenez, his book, Challenging Conversations, where he talks about, hey, let's transcend this passive aggressive thing, where you're either avoiding or you're being aggressive, and let's be an advocate. Be an advocate for the truth. Let's be an advocate for each other. And that's really the approach that you're recommending here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, it's key in a post-Roe world that we defy expectations and then challenge assumptions. And what gives us the freedom to defy the expectations is when people are surprised at how, hey, these guys aren't that bad. They're actually pretty reasonable and they're pretty nice. They don't hate me.
Let's talk about the church for a moment. And I know we need to have realistic expectations about what churches are. If you're in a liturgical community, say you're Catholic or Anglican, you probably are viewing church differently than the way most churches in this country are. You're viewing the church as a set of doctrines that we enact every single Sunday. But most churches, Scott, in America, and you speak in a lot of churches, so you can tell me if I'm wrong, most churches in America kind of orient around a central figure with an audience of people who like to sing songs and hear teaching. So the Christian discipleship can't really occur naturally in that environment. It would be sort of like saying,
well, there are challenges in that environment. You're right. But I'll tell you this, that a lot of pastors, and I don't fault them for intentionally doing this, but I think they misread the Great Commission. And I think if you talk to any pastor in America, he or she would tell you, yeah, we should be about the Great Commission. All right, what does the Great Commission say? We're to go make disciples. How do we make disciples according to Jesus? Well, the text tells us we teach them to obey all that Christ has commanded. What is one of those biblical commands? We're not to shed innocent blood. What is abortion? The shedding of innocent blood. Therefore, abortion relates to the Great Commission responsibilities of the local church. Look, Dr. Jeff, I'm not saying that every Sunday you've got to preach on abortion. I'm not saying that at all. But to think that abortion is simply a distraction, somehow a political thing over here that pulls us off mission, is mistaken. That and the fact that when we don't talk about abortion, we send one of 2 errant messages to congregants. We either convey the idea that abortion is no big deal, which means children will die in our churches, or we convey the idea that abortion is unforgivable, which means people are left crippled in their fellowship with Christ because they don't understand that grace can be there for them. So by avoiding abortion, we don't spare post-abortion men and women guilt. We spare them healing because unconfessed sin has them out of full fellowship with Christ.
That's really powerful. I can imagine having that conversation with a pastor. Of course, my pastor is extremely pro-life. You know, he's the pastor who, after Roe v. Wade fell, stood up the next Sunday and, you know, led us in a prayer of thanksgiving for the
God bless
change
him.
that had taken place. But I understand that a lot of churches are not like that. And you brought up a really significant point. So, you know, in any given congregation, what's the pastor's assumption? How many people in that congregation are men or women who have participated in an abortion decision? What
I
would you?
don't know the exact percentage, and honestly, the data is a little unreliable on that. But I think it's safe to say that you could be dealing with up to a third that have played a role. And by the way, it's not just the mother who had the abortion. There's the parent or the boyfriend who might have encouraged them to do that. They too are in on this, and they too are going to find it difficult to hear a message on abortion, perhaps. But that message can be healing to those wounded people if we use the bad news of sin, in this case abortion, to point them to the remedy that's found in the gospel of Christ. Once they understand the bad news, I think the good news makes a lot of sense and is quite a relief to them.
Yeah. Well, that's really powerful. I do have a heart for the people who are in that third, because I'm in that third, as you and I have talked about many times. That I helped my girlfriend secure an abortion when we were in college. And it is a decision that has lifelong consequences, and for which I've had to receive forgiveness from the Lord and from a lot of people who were in that process. But 75% of women who go to get abortions say that they felt pressured to do so by somebody else.
Yes, that is something that is remarkably consistent across all the data models we look at, that many, many, many women would not make the choice to abort if they felt supported by their family structure or friends around them, and maybe even a classmate who says, you know, you don't have to do this. I'll walk through this with you. I mean, one of the reasons why I rejoice that we teach on abortion at Summit, it's not just that we're giving students the head knowledge, we're also equipping them to be bold enough to say to a friend that's facing an untimely pregnancy, hey, you don't have to go this alone. I'll be here with you. And that alone could be enough to dissuade someone in many cases.
Yes. And we have had students who sat in your talk at Summit Ministries who at that moment were experiencing an untimely, you put it, unplanned pregnancy, and chose to keep their baby and not abort it and bring that child into through the pregnancy process and into the world outside of the womb.
Yes.
Incredible stories.
Yep.
Even
I
Christian kids, you
remember.
know, they can't believe they find themselves in this position. They realize now it was a terrible mistake. The question is what to do and who will support me if I decide to focus on life.
I remember at session 5, I think it was 3 years ago, a young woman pulled me aside and said, you're the first person that's going to know what I'm about to tell you. I'm pregnant and found out I was pregnant the day before I got on the bus to come here. Nobody knows. My parents don't know, and they're involved in church leadership, and I'm going to have to figure out how to tell them, but there's no way I'm going to kill my child. And I was grateful for that young woman's courage. But this is the post-Roe world, Dr. Jeff. We've got to be tough-minded and tender-hearted at the same time. And that's not an easy line to walk, but it's the line we got to walk.
Scott, talk to the people who have a friend who is experiencing an unplanned pregnancy. So this could be a young man who's impregnated a girl who's become impregnated. And this is obviously a consequential, life-changing thing to think about bringing a child into the world. They're wrestling everything in the culture, including very often, unfortunately, the people who they see as having authority in their lives, a mom, a teacher, somebody like that, often will say, you know, let's hit the reset button here, and you could get on with your life. Walk us through how to have that conversation with that person.
If I were talking to a friend that was facing an untimely pregnancy, there are three things I would absolutely keep at the forefront of my mind, and I think these are foundational. Number one, never assume that the child is safe. No matter how committed a Christian your friend seems to be, never assume the child is safe. Secondly, recognize this problem is bigger than you. So you're going to want to encourage your friend to get in touch with a local pro-life pregnancy center and get people involved who are skilled at counseling and encouraging someone like your friend. Don't shoulder doing this all on your own. And then thirdly, don't be afraid to both tell and show the truth of abortion. People say if I show visual depictions of abortion to someone facing a pregnancy, that could upset them. And my response is, what's worse, them seeing an abortion or actually going through and having one? So I want to make sure that I don't assume that child is safe. I don't try to do it alone, and I'm not afraid to tell the truth. You can be gentle in conveying the truth, but convey it nonetheless. And make sure you get those resources that are available to you by encouraging that friend to go to the local pro-life pregnancy center. They will help your friend get over the fear of telling parents, telling other people in their lives that matter to them, and will get them situated in working through this pregnancy in a way that will be good for both the mother and the child.
Those pro-life pregnancy centers, they're in communities all across the country. Is there sort of a national website where you can put in your zip code and find one that's close by you?
There
Yeah.
is, although sometimes Google will try to make it hard for you to connect with these centers, but if you're diligent, you can find them. Or you can always go to groups like CareNet or Heartbeat International that have networks of centers throughout the country. And that's not even mentioning all the independently run centers that are out there. There are, as the last numbers I saw, Dr. Jeff, pro-life pregnancy centers outnumber abortion clinics well over 2 to 1. So much for the lie that we only care about kids once they're born,
Yeah.
uh, or before they're born, pardon me. That's simply not true.
Yeah, this is so good. Well, Scott Klusendorf, the book is called Case for Life, new edition coming out, lots of new content. If you've thought about how to stand for life in a post-Roe world, this is the resource you need to have on your shelf. And Scott, I just want to say thank you as we close for your dedication to Summit Ministry students. We try to have you or somebody that you've trained in front of every single group of students that we have the opportunity to influence. And that's 70,000 kids a year. And then I know you reach a lot through assemblies and so forth, but you and your team are available. If somebody said, my pastor wants this to be addressed, but doesn't feel like,
Yep.
needs somebody to come in and help, you're available to do that. If somebody says, our local Catholic school has assemblies or whatever, and, but tell us very quickly how people can reach out to you.
They can reach us at prolifetraining.com. They can read about our speakers. For example, Megan Allman, who teaches at Summit. Janique Stewart has taught on occasion at Summit. And now we have a new gal, Leslie Seagraves, who's just dynamic as a speaker. And she is now representing us at events as well. So LTI, Dr. Jeff, is now me and three very dynamic, able young women who communicate the pro-life view.
Yeah. That's terrific. Thanks, Scott, so much for your time. And thank you for being on the show today.
Dr. Jeff, thank you for being a faithful witness for life and committing Summit students to be trained in this area. I wish more people would follow your lead.
Amen. Thank you to my guest, Scott Klusendorf, for coming on the show today. And thank you for listening to today's episode. If you enjoy the show, would you consider leaving a review on your favorite platform? Reviews help more people find the show. So Scott Klusendorf, Case for Life, Life Training Institute. Maybe Scott or one of his speakers should come speak to your church or school group. Please consider that. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you enjoy the show, would you consider leaving a review on your favorite platform? Reviews help more people find the show. And if you want more resources that can help you live out a biblical worldview as a student, parent, educator, or church leader, Head over to summit.org/resources for articles, videos, ebooks, and more. Also, if you're looking for more great podcasts that will build your faith and inspire you, our friends at Edify have just what you need. You can find more podcasts, including the Dr. Jeff Show podcast, on the Edify app. You download it at edify.app, or you can search for Edify, which is spelled EDIFI, in the Apple and Google Play stores.